My daughter-in-law stole from me for almost 2 years before I figured it out, and when I finally did, I didn't say a word. I just smiled, handed her a manila envelope at the dinner table, and watched the color drain from her face. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Edmund. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a claims auditor for an insurance company in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of job nobody finds interesting at parties, but the kind that trains you to notice when numbers don't add up. I retired early, right after my wife Carolyn passed from ovarian cancer in the spring of 2022. We'd been married 38 years. She was the one who kept the house warm. After she was gone, the place felt like a waiting room. My son, Brendan, is 34. He's a decent man. Quiet, a little passive, always trying to smooth things over before they get uncomfortable. He got that from his mother, the peacemaking instinct. He got the stubbornness from me, though he'd never admit it. He married Simone about 4 years ago. She was charming at the wedding. The kind of woman who makes eye contact and makes you feel like you're the most interesting person in the room. Carolyn liked her. I wanted to like her. I tried. The first loan was $2,000, 18 months after the wedding. Brendan called me on a Tuesday afternoon, sounded embarrassed, said they'd had some unexpected car trouble. Simone's transmission had gone out, and they were a little short that month. Could I help? Of course I could. I transferred it that same day. Didn't ask for paperwork, didn't ask for a timeline. He was my son. That's not how I thought about family money back then. The second loan was $3,500. That was 6 months later. A medical bill, Brendan said. Something with Simone's wisdom teeth that their insurance hadn't covered as much as expected. I asked if he wanted me to look at the bill, maybe call the billing office, because sometimes you can negotiate those down. He said no, they'd already handled it, they just needed the cash float. I sent it. The third time was $5,000. That's when something in my gut shifted, but I ignored it. Brendan said they were behind on rent because Simone's freelance work had dried up, and his hours had been cut. I believed the hours being cut. I knew his company had been struggling, but I remember hanging up the phone and standing in my kitchen for a long time, looking out at Carolyn's garden that I still hadn't replanted, and feeling something I couldn't name yet. By the time I added it up that winter, sitting at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, they had borrowed $12,500 from me over 14 months. I had nothing in writing, not a single text that said I owe you. Just my bank statements with outgoing transfers and my own memory. I didn't bring it up. I told myself families help each other. I told myself Brendan was going through a hard stretch and it would turn around. I believed that because I needed to. What changed everything was a Sunday dinner in February. I'd driven 40 minutes to their apartment in Westerville. Nice place, nicer than I'd expected for two people who were supposedly struggling. And Simone had made chicken marsala, which she knew I liked. We were sitting at their new dining table, the kind with the thick butcher block top that runs about $800 at West Elm. And I was thinking how nice it was to have a family dinner again, when Simone set down her fork and said she needed to talk to me about something. She said they were thinking about buying a house, said they'd found a place in Gahanna, 3 bedrooms, good school district. Said the down payment was the problem. They needed $20,000, and if I could contribute, say, 15 of it, they'd handle the rest. She said it like she was asking me to pass the salt, completely matter of fact. Brendan was looking at his plate. I asked her very calmly if she thought we should first talk about the money they already owed me. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something embarrassing at the wrong moment. Then she smiled, that particular smile that never quite reaches the eyes, and said, "Edmund, those were gifts. Brendan told me you offered." I look at my son. He didn't look up from his plate. I said, "Brendan, did I offer or did you ask?" He said quietly, "Dad, let's not do this tonight." I drove home in the dark and sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. I didn't cry. I was past the point where I cry about things. I was in the part of my life where I get very still and very methodical instead. That night I pulled up my bank statements going back 2 years, and I made a spreadsheet. Every transfer, every date, every amount. Then I went into my phone and pulled every text thread between Brendan and me. He had asked each time, in writing, "Hey Dad, any chance you could help us out with something?" And then the amounts. It wasn't ambiguous. But here's what I noticed next, and this is where the auditor in me kicked into a different gear entirely. 3 of the transfers, the ones totaling $8,000, had been requested by Brendan with specific explanations. The car, the dental bill, the rent. But when I looked at the timing, something didn't track. The dental transfer happened on a Thursday in April. I remembered that month because I'd been helping Brendan's cousin move that same weekend. So I texted Brendan's cousin, Roger, just casually and asked if he remembered that move. He did. He also mentioned in passing that he'd run into Brendan and Simone that weekend at a furniture store in Easton Town Center. Saturday afternoon, 2 days after I sent the money for the dental bill. I didn't say anything to Roger about why I was asking. I started paying closer attention, not in a dramatic way. I didn't hire anyone or tap any phones. I just watched. I'm retired. I have time. And I've spent 30 years watching people submit claims that didn't quite add up. Over the next 2 months, I noticed things. Simone posted a weekend trip to Nashville on her Instagram. Designer bag she was wearing in one of the photos. I looked it up because I'm that kind of person now. Was a Coach bag retailing for around $400. 3 weeks after I'd sent the rent money. Brendan's car, which was supposed to be having transmission trouble, looked perfectly fine every time I saw it in their parking lot. And then one afternoon I stopped by their apartment unannounced, which I almost never do, to drop off some of Carolyn's china that Brendan had asked for. Simone answered the door, and over her shoulder I could see their living room. New couch, big one. Sectional, light gray. The kind that fills a room. She saw me looking and said they'd gotten a good deal on it. I smiled and handed her the box of china and said it looked lovely. That evening, I called my attorney, a man named George Pittman who I've used for estate work since the 90s. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about George. When I finished, he said, "Edmund, you have a problem with documentation, but not an impossible one. The texts help. What you need to do now is stop talking and start building." He told me exactly what to build, and I did. Over the next 6 weeks, I didn't call Brendan once to bring up the money. I was warm at Easter. I brought a ham. I sat at their table, the expensive one, and ate and laughed and didn't say a single word about any of it. Simone refilled my iced tea twice. She thought I had accepted what she'd said at the February dinner, that the money was gifts, that we had moved on. People always underestimate quiet men, especially when the quiet men are grieving. George had advised me to send a formal demand letter before taking any further action. A certified letter outlining the total amount owed, the dates of transfer, and requesting repayment within 30 days. He drafted it. We sent it the second week of May. Certified mail. Return receipt. Brendan called me 45 minutes after it was delivered. He was upset, not angry, more like frightened. He said, "Dad, what is this? Why would you do this?" I told him I would be happy to talk about it when he was calm and when we were face to face. He said he needed to talk to Simone first. I said that was fine. I had time. 2 days went by. Then Simone called me herself. Her voice was different on that call. The warmth was gone. Not replaced by hostility exactly, but by something colder and more transactional. She said they talked it over and they felt the letter was hurtful and unnecessary. She said family didn't do things like this to each other. She said I was alienating my own son. She said Carolyn would be heartbroken. That last part was meant to cut deep. She was right that it landed. I had to set the phone down for a second and look out the window. But she was wrong about what Carolyn would have felt. Carolyn was the most honest person I've ever known. She would have been at the kitchen table right next to me with a legal pad. I told Simone very evenly that I hoped we could resolve this without further steps and that George's letter had outlined the options clearly. Then I said goodbye and hung up. No response to the letter came by the deadline. George had anticipated this. We filed in Franklin County Common Pleas Court the following Monday. The documentation we had was frankly solid. The bank transfer records, the text message history, a timeline affidavit I'd written myself, and 2 pieces of supporting evidence that changed the character of the case significantly. The first was a text from Brendan 9 months earlier, where he'd written, "Dad, I know we keep asking, and I'm embarrassed. Simone keeps saying you're fine with it, but honestly, I hate doing this. We will pay you back, I promise." He'd sent it at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, probably when Simone wasn't in the room. He'd never mentioned it again, and I'd never responded to the money part of it, just said not to worry. But there it was, in writing. Brendan knew they owed me. He'd said as much. The second piece of evidence was something I stumbled into, not something I went looking for. Brendan's cousin, Roger, the one I'd texted about the move, had apparently mentioned our conversation to another cousin, who mentioned it to her mother, who called me one Sunday afternoon and said, "Edmund, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but I think you should know." She told me that at a family birthday party the previous fall, she had overheard Simone telling 2 of her friends that she had her father-in-law completely handled, and that he was basically funding their lifestyle and didn't even know it. The cousin was willing to make a written statement. She did. I want to be clear about something. None of this made me feel good. I've seen people in movies and TV shows who get to this part of the story, and they're triumphant, energized, righteous. I wasn't any of those things. I was tired. I was 63 years old, and I was sitting in a courthouse with my attorney fighting over money with my own son and his wife. And underneath all of it was the grief of knowing that if Carolyn were alive, none of this would have happened. She'd have seen Simone clearly from the start. She always saw people clearly. I used to think I did too, until I learned that grief makes you want to believe the best about people because you can't afford another loss. Brendan tried to call me 4 more times over the following 3 weeks. I let them go to voicemail. George had advised limited contact, and more than that, I simply didn't trust myself to speak to him yet. Not because I was angry, because I was sad in the particular way that fathers get sad when their children disappoint them, and I didn't want to say something I'd regret. The court date was set for late July, but the case never made it there. Simone, it turned out, had retained her own attorney, separate from Brendan, which I found very telling. And her attorney apparently advised her, after reviewing the documentation, that her position was not a strong one. 10 days before the hearing, George called me on a Thursday morning and said they'd reached out about a settlement. They proposed repaying $8,000 of the $12,500. Simone's attorney argued the remaining amount could be considered gifts based on the informal nature of the transfers. George recommended I counter with $11,000 and see where we landed. We eventually settled at $10,500 to be repaid in monthly installments over 18 months with a signed promissory note. It wasn't everything, but it was documented. It was real. It wasn't a favor they could rewrite later as charity. The evening the promissory note was signed and exchanged, I made myself a pot of coffee and sat in my kitchen. Carolyn's kitchen, really, still her curtains on the windows. And I thought about how I wanted to handle the next part. Because there was still a next part. There was still Brendan. I called him on a Friday evening about 2 weeks after the settlement. He picked up on the second ring. He sounded like he hadn't been sleeping well. I asked if he could come to the house the following Sunday, just him, and have dinner. He was quiet for a moment and then said yes. He came. I made pot roast, which was one of the things Carolyn used to make on Sundays. We sat at the kitchen table, the old one, the one he'd grown up doing homework at, and we ate mostly in silence for a while. Then he put his fork down and said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have. I didn't know it had gotten that far. I knew, but I kept telling myself it was okay because she said you were fine with it and I wanted to believe her." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have said something to you myself." I said, "Yes, you should have." We sat with that for a minute. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbors had their window unit running. Then I said, "I'm not interested in staying angry at you, but I need you to understand what happened, and I need you to be honest with yourself about your part in it. Not her part, your part." He nodded. His eyes were red at the rims. He looked like he was 12 years old for a moment. I said, "Your mother would have wanted me to say that, not because I'm giving you a pass, but because she believed that honesty is how you actually love someone." He broke down a little then, not dramatically, just that quiet kind of crying that men do when they've been holding something for too long. I let him. I got up and got him a glass of water and set it on the table and sat back down. That's the most comfort I knew how to offer. Sometimes it's enough. We talked for almost 3 hours that night, about Carolyn, about the marriage, about things I hadn't known, that Simone had told Brendan his family didn't value him the way her family valued her, that she'd systematically worked to make him feel like his instincts, including the ones that told him to talk to me, were wrong. He didn't say this to excuse himself. He said it because I asked him directly, "Why didn't you just call me?" I don't know what happens to his marriage, and that's not mine to fix. Brendan is an adult man making adult choices, and as much as I love him, I cannot live his life for him. What I could do, and what I tried to do that Sunday night, was make it clear that the door to this kitchen, to this family, was not closed because of money. But I also told him this. If someone ever tells you that your instincts about your own family are wrong, pay attention to that. That's not love, that's control. He was quiet for a long time after I said that. He's been calling more regularly since then. He came over 2 Sundays ago and helped me finally replant Carolyn's garden. We put in daylilies and some black-eyed Susans along the back fence. We didn't talk much. We just worked alongside each other in the late afternoon the way fathers and sons used to do before everything got so complicated and so loud. When he left, he hugged me for longer than he usually does. I didn't plan any of this to hurt anyone. I planned it because I spent 31 years learning that when things don't add up, you don't look away. You get methodical, you get patient, and you let the truth do the work. That's what I did, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, I got my son back. The promissory note is in a folder in my filing cabinet, in the drawer below the one where I keep Carolyn's letters. Some nights I think about pulling it out just to look at it. I never do. It's not a trophy. It's just a document. What matters is sitting in the garden with my son on a Sunday afternoon and knowing that whatever comes next, we're at least being honest with each other. That's more than I had a year ago. I'll take it. I think about the moment Simone refilled my iced tea that Easter Sunday, smiling, relaxed, completely certain she had won. And I think about how I smiled back and said, "Thank you." People have asked me since then how I managed to sit there and act normal. Honestly, it wasn't hard. When you spent 31 years reviewing fraudulent claims, you learn that the truth doesn't need your emotions to survive. It just needs your patience. What happened to our family didn't happen because Simone was unusually evil, or because Brendan was unusually weak. It happened the way most quiet disasters happen, gradually through small choices that each seemed manageable on their own. She chose to take a little. He chose not to look. I chose to believe because I wanted to. Every one of us made a choice, and the consequences followed as naturally as water finding the lowest ground. I've been thinking lately about what it actually takes to get through something like this with your integrity still intact. Not your pride is easy to protect when you're angry. Integrity is harder. It means you don't lie even when lying would be easier. It means you sit across from the person who wronged you, and you tell them the truth plainly, without cruelty and without performance. When Brendan came to dinner that Sunday and said he was sorry, I didn't let myself off the hook either. I told him I should have spoken up sooner. I should have named what I was feeling instead of transferring money and hoping things would improve on their own. That's on me. Honesty runs both directions, or it doesn't run at all. There's also something I've come to understand about what I'd call clear-eyed thinking, the willingness to look at a situation as it actually is, not as you wish it were. Grief had softened my judgment. I wanted family dinners and easy relationships because I missed Carolyn, and I couldn't stand the idea of another loss. That's human, But wanting something badly enough to ignore the evidence isn't love, it's avoidance. The moment I pulled out the legal pad and started writing down the numbers, something in me settled. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I was finally being honest with myself about what I was looking at. Clear thinking is its own kind of courage. And then there's the endurance part. The 6 weeks of Easter hams and refilled iced tea and normal dinners while the documents were being assembled. People assume that kind of patience comes from coldness. It doesn't. It comes from deciding that you care more about the outcome than you care about the release of saying something too soon. I was tired every single day of those 6 weeks. But I kept going because the alternative was walking away from my son. And I wasn't willing to do that. Brendan and I replanted Carolyn's garden 2 Sundays ago. Daylilies along the fence. He didn't say much, neither did I. But he stayed 3 hours and hugged me longer than usual when he left. Some things don't need words. They just need time and the willingness to keep showing up. That's what I'd want anyone watching this to take away. Not the legal strategy, not the promissory note. Just that. Keep your character clean, keep your thinking clear, and don't give up on the people worth holding on to. The rest, one way or another, tends to work itself out.